Well, good morning, everybody. How you guys doing? Good? Happy Labor Day weekend. Thanks for hanging out with us today. I want to welcome our Lone Hill campus at ONE&ALL Gardens campus, those of you that might be in the fireside room, and those of you who join us online as well. So great to be with you guys this weekend. I got to tell you, just personally, it's been so fun for me to walk through this series with you over the past 4 weeks, and I just want to thank you for the way that you've made me feel so welcome and have embraced me as part of this team and this church. I'm really, really honored that I get to do this with my life. And I'm really excited that Jeff is coming back next week to kick off a brand new series called Renovation of the Heart. You do not want to miss that. Make sure you bring a friend to that. But the last 4 weeks, we've been talking a lot about how the Bible can seem like an episode straight out of reality TV. I mean, you read some of these stories about real people and you think, you got to be kidding me. Who would do that? And then that is just unreal. Week one, we met a guy named Esau, who we labeled the biggest loser. Not because he dropped some pounds or got fit, but because he lost everything. He gave up his entire future because he could not control his desire for instant gratification. In week two, we went on the amazing race with a young guy named Joseph, and we learned that God really does have a plan for our life. He just has a much better view from above. And along the way, God is working in the dark behind the scenes, and He's using whatever life throws at us to shape our character, to mold us into the right kind of person so that we will be the right kind of person in the right place at the right time, serving the right purposes of God. Last weekend, we met a bachelorette named Esther. She was an orphan Jewish girl who became the queen of Persia. And she possessed not only an inside-out kind of beauty, but she had incredible courage. It was an amazing story. And we learned that courage is not the absence of fear. It's moving ahead in spite of your fear. It's walking toward your fears, knowing that God's got your past, He's got your future, and He's definitely got your back. And who knows, you and I may be just one courageous decision away from making a huge difference in somebody else's life. For we are on this planet for such a time as this. So if you weren't here for the past 3 weeks, or if you're like me and you need to listen again, you can check it all out online. Incredible stories full of incredible drama. And the story we're going to unpack today does not disappoint in the drama department. It is one of these incredible stories in history that you kind of wish you had tickets for. I would have loved to have been there, right? Because in this thing, you got blood, you got idols, you got trash talk, you got villains, you got good guys, you got underdogs, plus you got fire. Lots of fire. And fire always makes things more spectacular, right? I was thinking about this story, and I remembered a true story from many, many years ago, back in my home state of Kentucky, where this distillery was going to come to a small town there in Kentucky, and a certain church there in this little town prayed against the distillery actually being built. They lobbied against it coming to town. The owner of the distillery was an atheist, and he was very non-sympathetic to the church's wishes, and he built it anyway. Well, one night, lightning hit it, and it burned to the ground. The owner actually sued the church, blaming them for the lightning strike. And the church denied any involvement whatsoever. So the judge in the case shook his head and said, okay, here we have an atheist who blames a God whom he says doesn't exist, and a church who denies the power of the one they say that does. So I just want to take a little suspense out of this story by telling you up front that the fire in this story is 100% God's doing. In fact, the main character in this fire story is God. And have you noticed that in every story he's been like the lead character? He's the star of the whole thing. I mean, it's that way all throughout the Bible, because the Bible is the epic story of God. I mean, He's always the lead. He's always the headliner. He's always the star. His great name is the one that's on the marquee out front. But the best supporting actor role in this story goes to a guy named Elijah. Have you ever heard of him? Elijah was one of Israel's most famous prophets. Now, it might be a stretch, but we're going to call him the voice. He was a bona fide four-chair turn kind of guy. He was a highly esteemed prophet. He was a spokesperson for God. He was seen throughout all of Jewish history as the voice. Still today, every time the Jews celebrate the Passover feast, they set an extra place at the table for Elijah. He's mentioned 29 times in the New Testament of the Bible. As Christians, we can't understand the life of John the Baptist, who paves the way for Jesus, without understanding the life of Elijah. And add to that the fact that the guy doesn't die, but God just takes him up to heaven in a chariot of fire, makes him a pretty special dude. However, if you ask Elijah, he would simply say, well, I'm nobody special. In fact, I live in a cave down by the river. And unlike a bunch of my other counterparts, like superstar guys like Daniel and Amos and Zephaniah and Haggai, I haven't written anything. In fact, my longest sermon recorded in the Bible is really only 22 words. But Elijah, he was the voice, often a lone voice. In fact, Elijah spent a lot of time hiding in that cave. He was on the run, he was isolated, he was afraid, because there was this evil king and queen who did not like the spokespersons for God at all, did not like prophets. They did not like hearing God's truth from anybody, especially Elijah. But that didn't stop him, because he was the voice. He was committed to speaking for God, even if he was the lone voice. And as a result, God did amazing things to this guy. And like Joseph we learned about, and like Esther that we learned about, like many of us have, Elijah learned that God, the great I am, he's always with you. I mean, not only in the breathtaking, sensational, big time, part the Red Sea, rain down fire from heaven kind of miracles, but mostly in the small, quiet whispers deep in your spirit. When you feel all alone, you feel abandoned. Even today, God often speaks through the gentle and the obvious rather than the spectacular. You know, we might say, God, I wish you would do like a big miracle for me. But the real miracle of Elijah's life and ours is the privilege of actually knowing the true and living God, knowing and walking with the creator of the universe. Now, another player in this drama is an evil king. He's a guy named Ahab. Now, not like fictional Captain Ahab from Moby Dick. This is a real person. He was actually the 8th king of Israel. And as Israel's most evil king, he did more to stir up God's anger than any other king before him. And when you look at his life, like on the surface, he's really not all that different from many of our lives the way we were at one time. I mean, he was a guy trapped in his own selfish desires. A lot of us have been there, right? He was unwilling to listen to God. A lot of us have been there. He was unwilling to do the right thing. A lot of us have been there. He married an extremely evil woman. I'm just kidding. His wife was a woman named Jezebel. Have you ever heard of her? In fact, do you know anybody named Jezebel? The two most unpopular names among expecting parents would probably be Judas and Jezebel. And for good reason. Jezebel, among other things, led her husband, the king, far away from God and drew him in all kinds of bizarre idol worship. She surrounded herself with 850 so-called prophets for these so-called little g gods. She and her husband would only listen to voices who would tell them whatever they wanted to hear and to justify any lifestyle they wanted to live. But the voice, the lone voice, God's spokesperson, Elijah, he told them what the true and living God wanted them to hear. So Ahab and Jezebel, they hated Elijah for speaking God's truth. So here's how the story goes. Elijah watches as Israel slides further and further away from God. And this is Israel. This is God's chosen people, the great nation from the seed of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the people that were rescued time and time again by God, a people once gratefully and deeply devoted to God. Well, now their culture is completely spiraling out of control. Everybody's doing whatever they want to do. They're partying all the time. They're sleeping with whoever they want to sleep with. It is girls gone wild and boys gone wilder, all in the name of worship of their gods. So our main character in the story, remember who it is? God, the only true God. He has kind of I'd call it a Popeye moment, where he says, that's all I can stand, and I can't stand no more. And he tells Elijah, it's time to do something. So Elijah comes out of hiding, and he tells his courageous friend, this guy named Obadiah, who actually worked for the king. He said, I want you to set something up. Now, Obadiah was a cool guy in his own right. Even though he had a job in the palace, he loved the Lord with all of his heart. And at one time, kind of did like a Schindler thing where he secretly hid 100 prophets of God in caves to keep them from the anger of his boss. So Elijah goes to Obadiah and asks him to set up a meeting with the king. And even though by letting the king know that he even knew Elijah could cost him his life, he sets something up, and Ahab agrees to meet with Elijah. And when Ahab sees Elijah, he greets him with a line that seems straight out of one of those movies where the evil king is finally introduced to the hero. Look what it says. When he sees Elijah, he says to him, is that you, you troubler of Israel? So there you are, in the flesh, the one stirring up trouble with all this inconvenient truth from God stuff. And Elijah responds, I've not made trouble for Israel, but you and your father's family have. You have abandoned the Lord's commands and have followed the Baals, these idols, these false gods. Now summon the people from all over Israel to meet me on Mount Carmel, and bring the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table. So Ahab sent word throughout all of Israel and assembled the prophets on Mount Carmel. This is Elijah saying, how about your gods and my God step outside? Let's settle this. Meet me on the mountain. Now, I don't know why Ahab agreed, but he did. And he sends word to Jezebel's prophets to meet on Mount Carmel for this showdown. I don't know, maybe in his arrogance he saw it as a chance to show off. I don't know, maybe he saw it as a chance for his wife to kind of strut her stuff. After all, she managed 850 well-fed prophets, and they were going up against one skinny cave dweller. This could be a great publicity stunt. They could sell a bunch of tickets, make a bunch of money. They could make a fool out of Elijah, make him even more unpopular than he already was. You see, the nation had been living in famine for 3 years, and it was a famine that Elijah had predicted would come. So the blame for the famine was placed squarely on Elijah. So this is a chance to finally get rid of this guy and his out-of-touch God and show the power of his gods and his royal prophets. Last year, I got to go to Israel for the first time in my life, and I got to stand on Mount Carmel. It's an incredible place. They got a little, like a carving, a statue of Elijah on Mount Carmel. There's an incredible view overlooking what they refer to as the Valley of Armageddon. It's where all these roads from the Middle East converge, where some believe kind of the final showdown is going to be fought. But standing there on top of Mount Carmel, I'm telling you, it just gave me chills thinking about this particular showdown. I'm telling you, this is a pay-per-view kind of moment. It's like ding, 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 the microphone drops. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the main event. In this corner, weighing in at 135 pounds, including his tunic, from the plains and the caves of Gilead, the one, the only, the one, the lonely, the voice, Elijah. And everybody boos because they believe Elijah is responsible for this famine. And in this corner, weighing in at a collective 17,000 pounds, the clever, the cunning, the royal sultans of sleaze, the prophets of Baal. Let's get ready to rumble! We might edit that out. I got a little carried away. I'm really sorry about that. But before this clash on Carmel could begin, Elijah courageously kind of takes the microphone and he says these words to the crowd. Says this to the people of God. Okay, so how long are you going to waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, follow him. But the people said nothing. That simple little 5-word phrase jumped off the page at me this week. But the people said nothing. It may be hard to believe, but I've been speechless before. I've been so confronted by the truth in my life that I couldn't speak if I tried. Ever been there? Lump in your throat, mouth goes dry, you just sit there frozen? And can I ask you, have you ever been sitting in like a place like this when an epic battle, I'm talking a colossal tug of war between your heart and your will, breaks out? I mean, you maybe live like this way day to day, and then once a week you come in here and these two worlds collide. Grace and truth, acceptance and challenge, fear and faith, worship and worry, hypocrisy and authenticity, sin and forgiveness. And you sit there at a loss for words because you know that God is trying to say something to you, that God is trying to get your attention. But you don't know what to do in the moment, so you just sit there frozen. Man, I have been there. We even get thinking in the moment, this is so weird. I feel like I'm the only one in the room. I feel like God is like speaking directly to me. And then we think, but you know what, as soon as this guy shuts up and I'm outside in the parking lot, this feeling will go away. Then I can just get back to normal and God will just leave me alone. Let me lovingly tell you something. He won't. He won't leave you alone. He loves you way too much. Did you know that God pursues you with this relentless love? I mean, he pursues you like you're the only one on the planet. And you know what? You can't outrun his love. You can't. And in those moments when you are still, in those moments where you sense and he's speaking to you, in those moments where you're just kind of, you can't speak and you're frozen, that's when he really wants to speak directly into your heart. So the people say nothing, they're frozen. But the voice, Elijah continues. And he sets up how this whole thing's going to go down. Look what it says. He says, I am the only one of the Lord's prophets left, but Baal has 450 prophets. Get 2 bulls for us, and let them choose one for themselves. Let them cut it into pieces and put it on the wood, but not set fire to it. I will prepare the other bull and put it on the wood, but not set fire to it. Then I will call on the name of the Lord, and you call on the name of your God, and the God who answers by fire, he is God. Now, I just love this. I love what Elijah and God are doing here. In ancient literature, Baal is known as the so-called God of fire. Thunder, lightning, rain, water, and fire. So God right here is playing to his opponent's supposed strengths. And I don't think it's any coincidence that God has chosen a man whose name is the combination of his own name. Elijah literally means, it takes a piece of God's name, Elohim and Yahweh. Elijah literally means the Lord is God. So this man, the voice, named the Lord is God, speaks to the prophets of Baal. He says, choose one of the bulls and prepare it first. Since there are so many of you, he said, I'm even going to give you a head start, is what he's saying. Call on the name of your God, but do not light the fire. So they took the bull given them and prepared it. Then they called on the name of Baal from morning till noon. Oh, Baal, answer us, they shouted. But there was no response. No one answered. And they danced around the altar they had made. I mean, can you see this scene right here? They're dancing, they're shouting, they're drinking, they're singing their hearts out. They're choosing every fire song they can think of. They're thinking, come on, Baal, light my fire. They're singing Pink's Just Like Fire. They're singing Johnny Cash, Ring of Fire. I mean, they're singing every fire song they know, and nothing happens. And that's when something awesome starts to happen. Now, I'm a basketball junkie. I love college basketball. I love the NBA. I played basketball most of my life. And I have been in lots and lots of games where a lot of good-natured trash talk went on. Well, this skinny little cave-dwelling prophet of God, he starts to trash talk. This is so cool to me. At noon, Elijah began to taunt them. Shout louder. Surely he's a god. Maybe he's in deep thought. Or maybe he's busy. And the word for busy literally in the Hebrew means maybe he's going to the bathroom. That's what it really means. Or maybe he's traveling. Oh, maybe he's asleep. You just need to wake him up. He just starts to trash talk these little g gods. And I love this scripture that I ran across one day in Isaiah, where God himself is kind of trash talking about these little g gods. Now, this passage is a little long, but I thought it was so cool you need to see it. So I'm just going to ask you, just track along with me here. This is God himself speaking. He says this, I am the first and the last. There is no other God. Who is like me? Let him step forward and prove to you his power. I mean, who but a fool would make his own God? An idol that cannot help him one bit. The wood carver measures a block of wood and draws a pattern on it. He works with chisel and plane and carves it into a human figure. He gives it human beauty and puts it in a little shrine. He cuts down cedars. He selects the cypress and the oak. He plants the pine in the forest to be nourished by the rain. And then he uses part of the wood to make a fire. And with it, he warms himself and bakes his bread. Then, yes, it's true, he takes the rest of it and makes himself a god to worship. He makes an idol and bows down in front of it. He burns, catch this, part of the tree to roast his meat and keep himself warm. He says, oh, that fire feels good. Then he takes what's left over and makes his god, a carved idol. He falls down in front of it, worshiping and praying to it. Rescue me, he says. You are my God. God says, such stupidity and ignorance. Their eyes are closed. They cannot see. Their minds are shut. They cannot think. The person who made the idol never stops to reflect. Why? It's just a block of wood. I burned half of it for heat and used it to bake my bread and roast my meat. How can the rest of it be a god? And should I bow down to worship a piece of wood? The poor deluded fool feeds on ashes. He trusts something that can't help him at all. Yet he can't bring himself to ask, is this idol that I'm holding in my hand just a lie? He trusts in something that cannot help him at all. Does that sound familiar to any of you? It does to me. Now, of course, you and I are, we're certainly intelligent enough not to worship a carved statue, right? But sometimes we bow down to the altar of image and looks, don't we? I mean, we can worship at the shrine of materialism, the shrine of success and status. You and I can give abnormally huge amounts of energy and devotion to our favorite sports team. We can put our total trust in politicians. We can worship celebrities. We can seek after self-gratification and fame, never stopping to think, hang on, isn't this idol just a piece of paper? Isn't this God just a piece of reflective glass? Isn't this God just a piece of metal and rubber? Isn't this just a piece of wood with stucco and shingles? Am I bowing before something that's just a lie? Because the truth is, gang, this God can't rescue me. This God can't answer me. This God can't save me. This God can't love me. This God can't create me or recreate me. This God can't sweep away my failures. This God can't give me a bigger purpose and a destiny. This God can't give me eternal life. Oh, they promised me that and all and more. But it's just a lie. And if you and I chase all the stuff of this life and we even make them into little g gods, we will miss out on knowing and experiencing the true and living God of unfailing love and mercy, that good Father, our Creator that made us to walk with Him every day of our life. Check out the prophets of Baal. They're crying out to their wannabe God. It says, so they shouted louder, and they slashed themselves with swords and spears, as was their custom, until their blood flowed. You ever gotten that desperate, that frantic, that frustrated with your gods? I've known a bunch of people that desperate, that they would get to the point of cutting themselves, harming themselves, because their God just couldn't help. Midday passed, and they continued their frantic prophesying until the time for the evening sacrifice. But there was no response. No one answered. No one paid attention. It's kind of a contrast to the people said nothing. Now their God said nothing. Verse 30, then Elijah said to all the people, come here to me. And they came to him, and he repaired the altar of the Lord, which was in ruins. It's kind of a shout out to their history. He's saying to them, do you remember when we used to walk with the living God? And with the stones, he built an altar in the name of the Lord. And he dug a trench around it large enough to hold 2 seahs of wheat, like a couple of liters. The purpose of the trench was to catch all the blood of the bull as it ran down the altar. He arranged the wood, cut the bull into pieces, and laid it on the wood. Then he said to them, fill 4 large jars with water and pour it on the offering and the wood. Do it again, he said, and they did it again. Do it again, he said. Do it a third time, and they did it a third time. And the water ran down the altar and even filled the trench. Now you would think instead of telling them to use water, he would have called them, go get some lighter fluid, go get some gasoline. You know what he's doing here? He's intentionally stacking the odds against God because Baal was the supposed god of lightning and fire. At the time of the sacrifice, the prophet Elijah stepped forward and he prayed, O Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel and that I am your servant, and I've done all these things at your command. Answer me, O Lord, answer me, so that these people will know that you, O Lord, are God, and that you are turning their hearts back again. Now notice, unlike the so-called prophets of Baal, Elijah doesn't dance around. He didn't draw attention to himself. He doesn't ask God to do it so the crowd will crown me as the winner. He doesn't ask God to do it so they'll finally start giving me the respect I deserve. No, Elijah wanted the same thing that God wanted. And that was for the people to turn their hearts back to their Father, to their Creator. Well, after his prayer, check out what happens. Then the fire of the Lord fell and burned up the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, and the soil, and also licked up the water in the trench. When all the people saw this, they fell prostrate and cried, the Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God. Still, the undefeated, undisputed champion of the universe. No wonder they call Him the great I am. You know, I think Elijah asked a great question of all of us when he asked those people. How long are you going to waver between two opinions? You see, the short story of the history of Israel since Moses led them out of Egypt was, we follow God. No, now we follow our own selfish desires. Oh man, our selfish desires have wrecked our lives. So now we follow God. No, forget it. Let's just do whatever is right in our own eyes. Sorry about that, God, but we need you back. We follow you now. No, wait a second, God. We found some better gods to serve, and on and on and on this would go. So Elijah, the voice, stands up with passion, and he asks, come on, how long are you going to waver? How long are you going to waver between fiction and truth, between famine and rain, between life and death, between misery and happiness, between guilt and forgiveness, between all these phony God wannabes and the true and living God? How long are you going to waver? And I think sometimes God wants to ask you and me the same question. You see, the audacity of God is that He clearly states over and over again in His Word that there's just one God, and it's Him. And it's not because God is on this huge ego trip. It's because it's true. And when you and I choose to cry out in desperation to any of these other gods we set up, there will only be silence because they are not real. They can offer no answers, no guidance, no truth, no comfort, no power. They are not gods worthy of our worship. And you might be thinking, well, you know what, bro? I would follow God. He would do something like that for me. I mean, if God would like rain down fire from heaven, do a miracle like that, I might believe too. Well, I thought about that this week. For me, every day of life is a fire from heaven miracle. I mean, think about this. Think about it for a second. A brilliant, blazing ball of fire is positioned exactly the right distance from our planet. And it sets every day over this ocean, painting the sky with unparalleled majesty. Fire twinkles millions of miles away in the night sky to remind us that while we sleep, there is a God who never does. Fire rises in the eastern sky and it lights another day where we awaken amazingly refreshed and our lungs fill up with the exact right amount of a thing called oxygen. Our hearts beat with incredible regularity, sending life-giving blood through miles and miles and miles of tiny intricate passageways all through our body, all the way to our brain that lets us see the miraculous reflection of our one-of-a-kind face in the bathroom mirror, and we say, wow, I get to do another day. To kiss our spouse, to hug our kids and know the miracle of loving other people so much that it feels like there's this fire just burning deep within your soul. To walk through the day ignited by the experience of happiness and challenge and accomplishment and friendship. To sometimes laugh so hard you think you're going to internally combust. To walk through the front door and know that the home fires of shelter and safety and joy are still faithfully burning. To sit outside at night by a fire pit or maybe by a campfire and reflect on all the bad decisions you've ever made in your life, all the stupid things you've ever done, all the times you should have crashed and burned, and you think, man, it's a miracle I'm still alive. You're right. It is. Your whole life is a miracle, sparked in you by a loving God. So I got to go back again and ask the same question Elijah asked. How long are you going to waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. You see, when it comes to us, there is no wavering with God. I mean, you may not yet believe in him, but I'm telling you, he believes in you. So much so that he promised that he would come down and bring us up out of the oppression and bondage of sin. The promised one who was going to come through the seed of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He would lay himself on the altar. He would take all the sins of the world on his shoulders so that mankind, so that you and I could be made right with God. And that one, Jesus, he never wavered. He went to the cross and voluntarily laid down his life so that we could know life. And I got to tell you guys, that's what lights my fire. I have spent the last 30 plus years of my life now trying to get people to see that there is a God who is crazy about them. There is a God who loves them with a relentless love. There is a God who holds out this invitation to embrace this thing called amazing grace, to grab hold of a brand new beginning, a fresh start, to accept the forgiveness of God through Jesus Christ, to acknowledge that Jesus is Lord, to let him heal you and fix you and change you and transform you and set you free and empower you as you follow him. And I'm sure, just like Jeff and just like Elijah, maybe many other preachers have felt, I have sometimes felt like a lone voice, like outnumbered in a culture where people surround themselves with only those who will tell them what they want to hear. A culture where pleasure and comfort and achievement and selfishness really are God. And the reason I feel so obligated to speak the truth of the true and living God is because the prophets of Baal are still deceiving the minds of people and taking them far away from the true and living God, far away from hope, far away from true happiness, far away from peace, far away from freedom, far away from fulfillment and purpose and passion, far away from the kind of life that God ordained for all of us to live on this planet. And I feel compelled to speak God's truth because I see so many people who are living beneath their privilege of knowing the God of unfailing love. And I'm passionate about this because life is short and eternity is forever, and there is a God who cannot bear the thought of heaven without you in it. So much so, he allowed his son to be the sacrifice on the altar and to take away our sins if we just humbly follow him. So let me ask you again, how long are you going to waver? If the Lord is God, follow him. I want to give you a chance to do that today, to follow the God, the lover of your soul. So I want to ask you right now just to bow your head. I'm going to give you a chance to come to the altar. Father, so grateful that you are the great I am, that you are the Most High God, that you are the creator of this universe, that you do miracle after miracle after miracle, day after day after day, right in front of us. And God, like we said a lot of times, and like Elijah learned too, that it's not always the spectacular fire from heaven thing. It's just the whispers that you speak in our spirit. Those times when we feel like we're kind of frozen and you're talking to us. Those times where you just come and you settle us down. God, we're so grateful for your still small voice as well. But God, I pray today that someone here would just step across that line and say, you know what, I'm tired of wavering. I believe that God is God, and that Jesus Christ takes away the sins of the world, and I want in on that. I want to accept the sacrifice of Jesus Christ, who took my rap for my sins. He took it upon himself, laid himself on the altar so that I could be forgiven. And right now, if you want to do that, I'm going to ask you to pray a little prayer with me, just something like this in your heart. Just say, Jesus, I'm all in. I love you for what you've done for me. I want to get to know you better, but I need a fresh start. I need a clean slate. Thank you for taking away my sin. Thank you for giving me a reservation in heaven. I acknowledge before you, I got a lot of stuff I'm not proud of in my life. I'm asking you to come into my life and make me clean. I want to start following you from this day forward. Now, if that's the desire of your heart today, I just want to ask you just for a second, just maybe slip your hand up in the air so I can just pray for you personally in my own heart. And I'm so grateful for you. So grateful that God spoke into your heart. He's been doing it for a long time. You know that. He's been pursuing your whole life. So excited for you to start this path of real life with the living God. And I'm gonna ask you in just a moment to do something really courageous. We've been talking about courage this entire series. But when we sing and we're all going to worship and respond back to God, as part of your response back to God today, if you could just come down front and just say, you know what, today is my day. I want to follow God through Jesus Christ. People will meet you down front, pray with you, talk about what that means. I just want to ask you to courageously step out of where you're at. Just come on down front when we sing. God, again, we love you. I'm so grateful.